Morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today for CoreNet's Mid-Atlantic event, The Way Forward. I'm Erin Michael of Capital One, and I'm the chapter's vice president. We are so excited for this conversation today featuring Spencer Levy and Michelle Meyer. Today, they're going to talk about the research data of what's telling us about the future. How will we work? How will we live? How will we invest? And even more, how will we play? They will take a deep dive into the impacts of COVID and provide a better understanding of what tomorrow will bring. Before I pass along the speakers, please note that they will try to answer as many questions as possible at the end of the discussion. Please use your Q&A feature at the bottom of Zoom and submit any questions that you have for them. And now, without further ado, please welcome Spencer Levy, Chairman of Americas Research for CBRE, and Michelle Meyer, Vice President, Americas Real Estate and Facilities for Oracle, and the Chairwoman for CoreNet Global.
Thanks so much, Erin. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started. So Spencer, when we look at various economic factors, whether it's GDP, it's the stock market, unemployment, inflation, I'd love to get your perspective on the economy. Are we in a period of stagnation, or can we expect things to get better? And if so, when?
Sure. Well, let me begin first with a shout out to CoreNet, because the last CoreNet gig I did was in California, and I was the opening act for Spike Lee. And so, and I know Michelle and her team had a role in getting Spike Lee there. And so that is now my new claim to fame. So go CoreNet, and this is just as cool of a gig as that one. But talking about Michelle's question, let's cut right down to the chase. From a macro perspective, CBRE's house view has been largely consistent and largely correct since March. And what does that mean? It means that we have been largely consistent and correct that the recovery would be faster and better than most people felt and thought because of the massive amount of government stimulus. And that has shown up on a macro level in jobs, which have been better than expected, GDP, which was horrible in the second quarter, but slightly better than expected. Then, of course, in stock market performance, which, while it's been choppy the last several weeks, has bounced back far quicker than we expected. So from a macro perspective, we've been largely correct, and our house view is that the GDP is going to fall about 5% this year, go about 5% next year, go about 4% in 2022. So our optimistic view is optimistic, but there's a big caveat here. It means we start 2022 about where we started 2020. So we have 2 lost years of growth, which is going to have a significant economic toll. And now I know that we're going to talk about real estate in depth in a moment, but I will just say that our micro view, so we segregate our view between the macro and the micro. Our micro view is segregating the real estate asset classes into 3 basic buckets: those that are coming back in year 1, which is industrial and multifamily; those that are coming back in year 2, which is office; and those that are coming back in year 3 and beyond, which is retail and hotel. So largely optimistic on a macro point of view for the reasons I laid out, but regrettably somewhat more pessimistic from a micro point of view. It's going to take a bit longer for real estate to come back than we had originally thought.
Well, you know, Spencer, you alluded to next year, and I'm just curious, with the upcoming elections, politics aside, how do you see the outcome affecting both national and local economies?
Oh, next question, please. I'm just So if you see by this super fancy background I have here, the reason why I have this super fancy background is last week I interviewed a well-known political commentator named Larry Sabato on a CBRE broadcast. And we were asking all of those questions, both from a presidential point of view and then from a local point of view. And so I'm going to be very clear about my comments. And I want to be absolutely sensitive to all of the social issues that matter so much to so many people, not only on this call and beyond, and how important those are and how those are going to change the way people vote. And I respect that. But what I'm going to talk about today is the economic impacts of from a federal point of view and then from a local point of view. So we have been studying presidential elections going back at least 50 years. And I can show you charts galore. What do they show? They show that the presidential candidate has limited impact on job growth and GDP, number one. Number two, they have limited impact, meaning zero impact, on real estate volume and values. So what does that mean? It means that the president doesn't matter that much to the economy and to our industry. Now, there are areas where it does matter. And now I'm not going to take a blue position or a red position or a Biden or a Trump, because I can make an economic case for either one. An economic case for either one looks like this. In the short term, Democrats, if they have a Democratic sweep of both the presidency and the Senate, and we assume they keep the House, they will be more stimulative in the short term than will be the Republicans, which will have a smaller package. The Democratic package is hovering around 2.2 to 2.5 trillion. The Republican package is somewhere around 1.2 to 1.5 trillion. That's $1 trillion difference. That's a big difference. And where is that difference going to show up that's most relevant to our industry? The place that it's most relevant to our industry is in those local and state localities that are unfortunately in fiscal distress. And why are they in fiscal distress? Well, they're in fiscal distress because many of them were spent too much money pre-COVID. I'm not going to say they're good or bad. It's just a reality. There were many municipalities that were in trouble, but post-COVID, many of them are now broke. There's no other way to put it. And in the event that we don't see more money flowing to these state and local governments, you know who's going to get hit with higher taxes? Us. Commercial real estate. We are easy pickings from a political standpoint. And so we are already seeing in California the potential for what's known as the split roll tax. We are already seeing in Chicago potential for changing the way that commercial real estate is calculated, and it's everywhere. And in the absence of a state and local bailout, it's going to be worse. And so that is part A. Now, so in the short term, it may be better to have a Democratic administration. Now, in the long term, there are other risk factors that may lead you towards Republican, and those include lower taxes, because there's a risk of capital gains taxes being higher under a Democratic administration. There's a risk of higher regulation. There's, of course, risk on the 1031 exchange, which has been on the table now since the beginning of time, which is really the 1986 Tax Act from Ronald Reagan, of getting rid of that. All of those things could damage the commercial real estate industry. There are also politically sensitive industries like oil and gas, like healthcare, like the military, like technology, which has now become very politically sensitive, all of which could be altered depending upon whether we have a Republican or a Democratic administration. But the advice I give my clients is twofold. Number one, headline risk equals opportunity. I wrote a blog about that about a year ago, which said, look, a lot of people get scared by the presidential election. Don't be scared from an economic point of view, because it doesn't have that much impact. If you're going to act, sometimes you should act now, because you can act at a discount because there's less players in the space. Number two, local matters more. I mentioned the challenges with respect to taxes. Taxes are a local matter, so follow those local elections carefully. The other thing that's significant is with respect to rent control. And I'm going to be very, very clear on rent control. I am a big affordable housing advocate. I don't want anybody else coming off this call say Spencer threw affordable housing under the bus. Exactly the opposite. I want as much affordable housing as we can get, but the solution isn't rent control. The solution is looser zoning laws. And Minneapolis, about a year and a half ago, changed their zoning law to allow you to go vertical in single family areas. Regrettably, California had Article 50 last year, which crashed and burned. And all that would have done was allow you to build vertically near transit stops in suburban areas. So we need looser zoning laws. We need more affordable housing. And it looks like there may be a technical issue here, because I do not see my handy dandy partner on this, Michelle, moderating. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to continue down with the questions as if Michelle were asking the question until she pops back up on the screen. If somebody from CoreNet could find our friend Michelle, that would be terrific. And so the question is, clearly the hospitality industry has been dramatically impacted with the lack of business and personal travel. I've heard that luxury brands are most impacted, but the mid-range hotels are doing better. Is that perspective correct? When do you think we'll see some resurgence in business travel? I've also heard some companies don't plan to travel the way they did pre-pandemic. Well, let me be clear on this one. This is a guy who travels 200,000 miles a year, and I've been sitting in my house now for 8 months. Now, I have been traveling more than most because my son Will plays travel baseball. And by playing travel baseball, I've been going up and down the East Coast since June the 1st. I've been to North Carolina, South Carolina, I've been to Georgia. And what have I been to in these places? I've been to fancy hotels. I've been to not so fancy hotels. And so because of that, let's see here, I have a message here. Because I've been staying at these fancy hotels, I know that there is tremendous demand for these hotels. And the demand for these hotels is from people that want to drive to them, the consumer, the leisure traveler. So that's coming back already. We've seen that in China. We've seen that in Europe, and clearly we're seeing it here in the US. Now, a lot of that was because we were in the summer travel season and people wanted to get out. So is it going to get worse during the fall when people don't travel as much? You bet. And when you want to talk about worse, it's going to get even much worse when you're dealing with international travel and when you're dealing with business travel. International travel, I was on the phone last week with my head of hospitality research, terrific analyst named Jamie Lane. Jamie says, look, some of these hotels are not coming back till 2024, and some of these hotels are never going to reopen. In New York City, we're saying our house prediction is that they're going to lose 17,000 hotel rooms. And if you're doing the math, that's about 10% of the stock in New York City. And I was on the phone the other day with the CEO of Host Hotels. He thinks it's 20,000, but we're all guessing on things we don't know. We do know that the demand is going to be destroyed for some period of time. That's the bad news. Here's the good news. We're still confident that it will come back. Will it come back at a lower plane? What does a lower plane mean? Less business travel over the long term? In the short term, without a doubt. I don't see business travel getting back to pre-COVID levels for several years, probably no sooner than 2023, possibly 2024, but it will start to come back next year. I went to my office for the first time on Wednesday of last week. I'm going to my office tomorrow. I can't wait to see my clients, and I'm going to do it as soon as I can. And I know there's tremendous pent-up demand there. That's one person's opinion. What you're really talking about is convention hotels, and there are no convention hotels that are going to be getting significant demand any earlier than 2022. Okay, next question. And I'm still looking for Michelle. Hopefully she can come back here soon. Many of us, depending upon the market. Oh, there's Karen. Hello, Karen.
I'm going to help you here.
That's okay, Karen. You know,
hello, friend.
Cornet is so awesome. I was ready to roll, man. I've had bigger challenges than this. Come on. This is all you can throw at me.
Okay, here we go.
All right, Karen, roll on. Let's go.
So let me get my interview voice on.
Okay.
I want to talk about the suburban flight. We're hearing a lot about hub and spoke reactions to, you know, urban live, work, play environments that are so condensed and rely on public transportation. And people really are looking for space and or cost reductions in their real estate. Can you talk to us a little bit about that?
Absolutely. Well, there's the key phrase that we're all talking about during this crisis is acceleration of trend. So is it an acceleration of trend that people are moving to the suburbs? Well, I think it's a little bit of a acceleration of a trend of millennials, because a lot of people said, oh, millennials will never leave in the city. Guess what? They've been leaving the city for years because they've been getting married, they're having kids, and they're coming back to going to the suburbs. Now, we're seeing a significant amount more of that now. And the question is that durable? My short answer is, in the short term, it is durable. For the next 1 to 3 years, you're going to see significantly more suburban demand. Obviously, in single family homes, anybody on this call who's got a friend that's in the single family brokerage business, they have never been happier. My father-in-law, this is almost a weird story, but my father-in-law is a land developer. And let me tell you something. Every crisis that we've had for the last 40 years has been a nail-biting moment. Not this one. He's finally found his glory days in the land development business, because that's how strong the suburban market is right now for selling homes. But we are also seeing that in demand for other things, in particular office space. But it's really short-term office space. It's 1 to 3 year leases, pre-built space, and yes, dare I say it, flex space. A lot of people are throwing flex space under the bus because of some of the capital markets challenges of WeWork, okay? guess what? Flex space may be taking it on the chin right now, but it's going to come out of this better than it was before. There's going to be more demand for it. Why? Because the agile workplace or the fluid workplace, these are two terms we use a lot around here, is going to be even more important. And particularly because this is CoreNet. You're all corporate real estate professionals. You're all thinking about your footprint of your company. Well, the footprint of your company is still going to disproportionately have a large headquarters, but I would be surprised if more of you don't use a hub and spoke model where you have more space in suburbs and more of you use flex space as some of your swing space, not only in satellite locations, but in the very buildings where your headquarters are located as swing space there as well. So I think the future of flex space is even brighter today than it was pre-COVID. And that's one of the implications, and part of that's going to be in the suburbs. But let me just finish with one other thought. While I think it's an acceleration of trend into suburbs, I'm not sure how durable it is. So I can give you an example of two large banks that built million-square-foot facilities in Stamford, Connecticut, back in the mid-1990s, or in 2000. And it was like the best idea ever. Why is this the best idea ever? Bill, our younger professionals live in the city and they'll reverse commute on Metro North. And all of our senior executives live out in Stamford and Greenwich, and they'll just drive in. It didn't work. Why? Because they could not attract and retain talent, period. That is the name of the game before COVID. It's the name of the game today, which is why the suburbs, I do not believe, are durable for office demand, except in the hub and spoke and some flex space.
You don't think that that example has to do with the tax system in Connecticut and how upside down that might be?
I don't know if you've been looking at the tax rolls in New York City. They ain't much better.
Okay.
So I would suggest to you that tax definitely is a driver. And I think it's a great question, Karen, because when we talk about acceleration of trend, we're talking about which trends are durable and which are not. Okay. Obviously, we've seen an exodus of some very high net worth individuals out of Connecticut into Florida. Okay. But we've also seen an exodus beyond the billionaires of just regular folk moving out of the Northeast into the Southeastern United States, into Texas, into the Southwest. That trend is durable because not only are we seeing the people moving there, we're seeing the money going there. And where the money goes, people flow. I don't know, that sounds like a Don King kind of statement, but the bottom line is money and people are flowing to the Southeastern United States. They're flowing to Texas. They're flowing to the Southwest. That's durable. And I'm sure many of your companies are looking at those locations as well.
Well, Michelle, you're back, so I get to pop off. Thank you.
Well, no,
Well done,
thank
Karen.
you. Thank you, Karen. So, the beauties of working from home, sometimes the internet at the most inconvenient times decides not to work. So then you have to, come up with a plan B. So I appreciate Karen's intervention. But, Spencer, relative to flex space, I have to tell you, with this pandemic, people seem to be a little bit reluctant to be around others. And, I can appreciate companies want the flexibility. They certainly, don't want the ongoing lease obligations, and most flex spaces are just a membership agreement. But I really wonder how comfortable people are going to be being around others in any type of setting.
Sure. So let me talk about two things. First of all, let me talk about the design of flex space. And the second thing, I'm going to talk about long-term versus short-term. So I think there's a misconception about what flex space is. Most flex space is demised, meaning that you have your own space, and your own space is your own area that you control. So that space is already back and is going to be stronger than ever. The other space, which is the membership model, which is high density in common areas, everybody is relatively close to each other. That's the one that in the short term is going to have a problem. It's going to have a problem probably until the end of 2021. But after that, I think we're going to be reverting back closer to, not exactly where we were, to the density patterns we had seen prior. And why? Well, number one, we're going to have better safety from better ventilation, better furniture. Furniture is going to be more hard surface versus soft surface because it's less susceptible to disease and it's easier to clean. So there'll be things like that. But also we need to think about math, right? I hate to bring capital markets into these conversations, but let me just talk math reality. So there's three math realities that are going to hit all of us in the face once we start thinking about density. One is in multifamily, where a lot of people are saying that people are going to want to have more space, not less. I'm like, no, they're not, because they're going to have to pay more rent and they're going to go right back to the same size space. That's part A. Part B, people are saying, oh, we're going to have less people in restaurants. No, we're not, because that means they can pay less rent. And guess what? They're going to get more high density again. And yes, in co-working space, density will get back closer to what we had before than we think, with these increased safety things in place, because post 2020, end of 2021, when the disease is under control, people are going to revert back closer to previous use patterns than not. Will there be some changes? Yes, there'll be some changes. There's going to be a little bit less density. There's going to be better ventilation. There's going to be better furniture. But I think that the co-working space, the future is brighter than ever.
That's really nice to hear, because I mean, certainly, many corporate occupiers like myself are trying to anticipate what the future may look like. And, we don't know. There's some people that are going out. Ford's a great example, where they're trying to redesign offices while their employees are working from home during this pandemic. And there's others that are taking the wait and see attitude to see how the work environment should be modified when we actually return. So I'm just curious, based upon your perspective relative to flex working, what do you think about these companies who are already modifying their work environments?
Well, first of all, I have great respect for people that are trying to make decisions today under any circumstances, because I'm an early 1980s music fan, and I like the band Asia, and they had a song called Heat of the Moment. Well, we're in the heat of the moment right now. People are making some decisions that I think they're going to make a different decision once things are a little bit cooler. And so I'm going to cite a study first, and then I'm going to cut to the chase. So there was a terrific study in 2015 by Stanford University. And by the way, anybody that shoots me an email, I'll shoot you to the study. And it studied work from home. And what did it say? There were no surprises in this study. Work from home works. It's more efficient. You can get stuff done. But what it's not, and here's the key word that we're all going to debate, it is not more productive. Because productivity and efficiency are different things. And what is productivity? Well, it's learning the soft communication skills you need. It's getting promoted. It's learning how to socialize. It's getting a corporate culture. It's attracting and retaining talent. Productivity is the key. In fact, I'm just going to quote Harvard Business Review. Harvard Business Review, quote, great companies focus on productivity. They do not focus on efficiency. And that is why the office is going to be more important than ever post-COVID. Now, are we going to have less use of it? Yeah. Now, the question that we're all asking is it 5%? Is it 10%? Is it 20%? Well, anybody that says they have the answer to that is probably taking a step too far, because now this is going to sound a little bit smug, but let me cut to the chase. I have more information on my screen than 99.999% of the industry. I have seen every survey. I do econometric analysis myself, and I've been analyzing this thing 6 ways from Sunday, speaking to the largest investors in the world. Bottom line, nobody knows. Nobody knows whether it's 5, 10, or 20%. What we do know is what the trends were pre-COVID, and I believe that they are more likely to continue. And those trends are attraction and retention of talent. A live, work, play environment is superior, and the big cities got it more than anybody else.
Yeah, so a couple different themes there I want to touch on. One, you mentioned about productivity and certainly corporate culture. And I know a lot of companies, as we've all been working from home, have struggled with how do you embed that culture in new employees. So any words of wisdom on that?
Well, I can only speak to my company, but every company on this call has different corporate cultures. But I know every company on here, they're all great companies. My company has a value. It's called RISE: Respect, Integrity, Service, Excellence. I live by that every day. And my definition of respect isn't fancy. I treat everybody I meet exactly the same. And that's just a non-hierarchical way of looking at the world. But also, these other things matter as well. So, but I think it's very hard to have RISE values in a remote location. Can we do it for some people? Absolutely. But for most people, I think we need to be together more often than not. And that's probably the case for most companies.
Yeah, I would agree. That's the one thing I keep hearing over and over again at Oracle is working from home's been fine, but what we lose out is that ability to collaborate and have those kind of water cooler conversations with others. And while tools like Slack can be amazing, it doesn't take the place of that human interaction. You mentioned a little bit about, the war for talent, and we talked a little bit about some of the urban markets, especially in this pandemic. And I've seen articles, as I'm sure people on this call have, about folks who are looking to leave those urban areas, find a lower cost of living. So I'm just curious, do you really foresee a flight out of some of those urban markets and maybe greater geographic dispersion in this war for talent?
Well, CBRE just wrote a study called the Tech Talent Report. We've been writing it for the last 5 or 6 years. And what the report shows is that what matters is being a talent creator or talent attractor, right? And they're different. So our number one talent attraction city in America is Charlotte, but it's not one of the best talent creators because Charlotte is a net beneficiary of the Research Triangle near Raleigh, Durham, with Duke and North Carolina State and North Carolina. By the way, you know what another great talent attractor is? Chicago, because it is getting all these great Midwestern schools nearby. People want to go to Chicago. But you know what's a great talent creator? And yeah, here comes my Mid-Atlantic CoreNet shout out. Washington, D.C. Washington, D.C. has been in the top 5 of our talent creators for the last 5 years, and it keeps getting better. It wasn't a guess when Amazon chose Northern Virginia to go there, and other tech companies are coming there with them. They were looking at our study and other things like it, right? Because the bottom line is talent wins. And so right back to your question, I think that there's durable trends, and I think there's not durable trends. Not durable trend is people moving out of these talent attraction creation places. I think people are going to go right back to them because not only do they attract and retain talent, they have terrific infrastructure. And even though people are scared to get on the train today, they won't be tomorrow. And they also have tremendous infrastructure as it relates to capital creation. I mean, most of the venture capital in America goes to 2 places. It goes to San Francisco and Boston. Everybody else is scrambling after scraps, right? Why is it going there? It's going there because these are the dense pools of talent. It's not going to change. I mean, you see a lot of these corporate headquarters CEOs, I'm not going to name them, that have said, we're going to let people work from home. Well, some of these same CEOs are now renting or buying a tremendous amount of space in places like New York and elsewhere. So New York, San Francisco, DC, Chicago, LA, you're the future.
So is it fair to say this is just a temporary pause and things will come back because of the infrastructure, because of the investment?
It's worse than a temporary pause. Okay. This is a shift that does accelerate some trends. So while I'm a big fan of the big cities, I'm also a big fan of Denver. I'm also a big fan of Raleigh. I'm also a big fan of Charlotte, of Nashville. So yes, you will have a more diverse set of cities that companies will go to tap into talent because talent is scarce. But talent all goes to the same basic type of places that have terrific live, work, play environments and have other talent attractors and creators. And many of them are now in formerly secondary cities like Denver, like Nashville, like Raleigh, like Charlotte, like Austin. By the way, the only 2 cities that have gone from second tier, that really third tier status to first tier status in my book were Seattle and Austin. Why? Because of talent attractors and creators.
Makes sense. So let's talk a little bit about, some of the disruptors and innovations you might have seen during this pandemic.
Sure. So the disruptors is what we've all experienced. I hate to bring up this example, but I think you have to. I think you got to talk about the difference between this and the 9/11 example. In the 9/11 example, it was horrible in every way imaginable, but it was a one-time event. Just it didn't have long-term ramifications to it. But to the average person, they weren't impacted by it as directly and for as long of a duration as this one. That's a permanent scar on the psyche of the world. It's never happened before. And that's going to create profound changes over the long term that we haven't even considered yet. But I think that those people are making conclusions based upon this heat of the moment time. That's where I will differ with them. I will differ because I can't make a decision when I'm under tremendous stress. I need to be outside that stress to make that decision, to make it with a cooler head, without these outside distractions. So But this being at home for 7, 8 months, could be a year or more for other people, will have permanent changes in the way people think about how they live, work, and play. A lot of people say they want to go back to the office less. There's a lot of people want to go back to the office more.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that because I've gotten quite a few phone calls from different executives within our company trying to figure out how to get back to the office. And when we politely explained we're really not facilitating that access, there's been a little bit of disappointment because I think everyone's getting to that point after 6 or 7 months where a change of scenery would not go amiss.
Sure. So, Michelle, can I turn this debate around for a second?
Sure.
I want to ask you a couple questions if I could. So, we're talking about some of the challenges in urban environments, um, going from the urban to suburban areas because of the challenges, not only as it relates to mass transit, but there's, social issues involved in the cities as well. Can you weigh in on this? I mean, how is Oracle handling these issues?
Yeah, well, again, keep in mind our offices are still not open. We're still working from home. We have heard a fair amount of concern from our employee base, those who commute, about going back into urban areas. For the reasons you mentioned, when we look at talent, when we anticipate what our future business needs are, we do expect to go back to those markets. So fundamentally, we're not changing the dynamics of our portfolio. I would even come back to you and say that pre-pandemic, we were looking at many of our locations that were underutilized, some of our smaller offices. And what the pandemic did is just simply accelerated some of our plans in terms of not reopening or reoccupying those sites. But in terms of urban areas, and again, many of the cities that you named are prime for us from a talent perspective. We will go back. It's just a question of when. Are we going to change our strategy and lease more suburban offices? No, that's not part of what we think makes our company great. We like this model of having people in a hub because of the synergies, because of the collaboration, because of the growth opportunities.
Well, I agree with all that. Let me push you just a little bit farther, Michelle.
Sure.
I mentioned the flex space. I mentioned
Yeah.
we had a traditional long-term lease, and we're seeing the rise of flex space. What's your point of view on that? Will Oracle be taking more flex space?
Yeah, it's interesting on the flex space because we weren't a heavy user of some of the various providers in the market. We used flex space at a moment in time for interim needs. Maybe we needed to have a legal entity presence in a certain country. As you mentioned, there's the open, very collaborative part of flex space providers, and then there's the private suites. And even in the private suites, we often found that the densities they were offering, we need to lease even more space. So at some point, it's a trade-off. I think for us, the real trend that we're seeing is more and more employees will elect to change their behavior and change their behavior in two ways. Maybe pre-pandemic, they didn't embrace remote working as much, but clearly there are some job functions it suits very well. There's other folks who had dedicated space who will now be defined in our terminology as flex, meaning they don't need that dedicated space at the office. They can come drop in and they won't be at the office 5 days a week. So if anything, we're seeing behavioral changes that ultimately will drive some portfolio changes.
Great. Let me touch on another issue. I think that's very, very important. The diversity and inclusion. CBRE recently appointed a new chief diversity officer, Tim Disman, who's a dear friend of mine. Terrific guy, is going to make a huge difference. But I know it's increasingly important today. How's Oracle tackling that issue?
Yeah, so we've always had a strong D&I presence. We have dedicated resources to that. And if anything, in the wake of some of the recent shootings, folks like George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, et cetera, it's really opened up those conversations and dialogues internally. I would also come back and say that CoreNet too has done an amazing job to try to use its collective power to eliminate discrimination and promote equality in the workplace. And putting putting that to the test, they're now offering, just starting this month, a new certificate program on a range of topics. There'll be several webinars, and folks who want to participate in those webinars can earn a certificate. So I would just say, as we all look to become better educated about having conversations and eliminating discrimination and promoting equality in the workplace, these are great opportunities to take advantage of some amazing sessions. And even in the upcoming North America virtual summit, Nita Mosby Tyler, who again has been featured before, will be talking about racial discrimination and bias. So I think there's some great professional opportunities that we all can take advantage of to further educate ourselves.
Great. So Michelle, we've got about 20 minutes left here. I don't know when you want to go to the out, if we see any questions yet. If not, we can keep rolling.
I think let's open it up and see if there are any Q&A. Otherwise, I can keep asking questions, Spencer.
All right, well, I love it.
So if anybody does have a Q&A, if they want to put that either in the chat or in the Q&A function, that would be terrific.
Well, why don't you keep going with the questions while they start?
Okay, so you talked a little bit about, some of the markets earlier, Spencer, like Nashville, like Denver, like Chicago. You mentioned Seattle and Austin. Great from a tech talent standpoint. I'm just curious from an investment standpoint, do those same locations match up in terms of where investors want to put their money?
Well, they do. And as I talked about at the beginning, there's the acceleration of trend concept, but what I usually call it is the DDD, durable demand drivers. What are durable demand drivers? Well, durable demand drivers typically are a growing population, a growing amount of talent in the population, higher education, and these are durable demand drivers. And where have you seen these durable demand drivers? Well, you've seen it to the southeastern United States, Texas, and the Southwest. Now you have seen it in Seattle, you have seen it in Austin, you've seen it in other places, but you've also seen it. What's interesting is when people say that, oh yeah, well, what does that mean for the older cities? Well, the older cities adapt. And the best example I would give you of that is the Fulton market in Chicago, which is Chicago's is about an old school city as you're going to get. But the Fulton market is one of the best live workplace environments in America. We've seen some major tech companies move there. We saw McDonald's move its headquarters there. We've seen great new restaurants there. So I think that while it's true from an investment standpoint, a disproportionate amount of the money is looking for these high growth, quote, new school live work play markets like the Nashvilles, like the Raleighs, like the Seattles, like the Austins. I think the old school, so to speak, markets like Chicago, like New York, LA, constantly reinventing itself, and their long-term futures are bright. But, look, I want to give you I don't know if this is a funny story, but this is a true story. CBRE is about to come up with our new cap rate survey. Might come out as soon as this week, and I wrote the cover blog for it. And my title for my cover blog was called See, Spot, Stay. You normally used to talk about see, spot, run. When I see spot stay, what I meant was the spot market cap rates of most assets have stayed about the same as they were pre-COVID, which is shocking to most people. Like, how's that possible that cap rates can stay about the same, which is the multiple you put on NOI? Well, first of all, there's not all good news here because the NOI in many assets have gotten crushed. And so we have seen some significant value diminution, particularly in the hotel space. But for the best assets in industrial, in multifamily, and dare I say it, in office, yes, office, we're seeing values that were the same as pre-COVID. So the story is going to be difficult for the next 12 to 18 months, but at least the capital markets are giving us a little bit of a point of hope from our dog spot.
Thank you so much for that perspective. It's actually refreshing to me to, hear a little bit about the cap rates. I want to go to a question that's been posed here, and that's when we look at technology, whether it's, digital contract tracing, sensors, room booking apps. What role do you see it playing in expediting a return to the office? Or will we not see a large-scale return until a vaccine is widely available?
Well, it's good, but it's not good enough, unfortunately. I had thought when I first gave my opinions on many of these calls back in March, April, May, I used to talk about the 3 T's: testing, tracking, and technology. I said, that's the ticket to get us back in. And to a certain degree, it is, because I'm going back to my office tomorrow and I've got to do a self-temperature check and a few other things to get in. But they're not good enough. And unfortunately, and I don't want to get political here, even though I got the picture of the Capitol behind me. One of the things that was in the Republican plan that never got passed pre-election was a liability shield. And I know they have that in different parts of the world where employers were able to get people back in. If they do everything that's reasonable, they shouldn't be on the hook if some person tragically gets COVID. But in the absence of that, you're going to have a very slow comeback to the office as employers correctly worry about their employees' safety first. But TTT, testing, tracking technology, will help to some degree. I speak to my colleagues around the world every day. My colleagues in Paris are largely back. In London, they're back about 25%. In Asia, they're largely back. And it's because of TTT, testing, tracking technology. It's good, but not good enough in the absence of other things like a liability shield and certainly the vaccine.
Yeah, I would say I agree. The testing, tracking, and technology is key. I think the U.S. and Latin America are certainly going to be slower from a return standpoint, and some of that is just the difference state by state. There just isn't a holistic U.S.-wide approach. So much is left up to different governors, and that lack of consistency certainly creates some challenges for corporate occupiers like myself. So I agree with the perspective. I'd also say that, all these technologies cost money. These aren't cheap solutions in certain cases to implement. So, when you're looking across the enterprise, it can be quite a big investment, especially when you consider some of the PPE that companies have already had to spend money on.
And that's before you talk about the HIPAA laws. What if somebody has an elevated temperature? That's private information.
Yeah,
there's all kinds of things out there.
How are we going to handle that, right? And who's going to take responsibility? So a few more questions for you here. Disney recently announced they're going to lay off 28,000 employees. So can you talk a little bit about the perceived effects of that?
Well, look, regrettably, I guess the good news and the bad news. The good news is the government has done a much better job than most people had feared coming into this crisis with the PPP, with unemployment insurance and other things. And guess what? We need a lot more. I think the good news at a minimum, we're going to see about another $1.5 trillion at a minimum, depending upon we have a Republican or a Democratic administration. But yes, I think a lot of the layoffs have just begun. I think that you're going to see a lot. The recovery was much slower than many people have hoped, certainly industry by industry. And of course, the leisure business and hotel business, they got hit the hardest. But there were other businesses, and I would note that the average consumer spending is now back to above pre-COVID levels. So there are many businesses that are doing back to closer to normal. So the bad news is if you're in the hotel and leisure businesses in particular, but there are other businesses certainly not immune, you are going to see more layoffs certainly in the short term. But there's what I would call pent up demand. And here's my shout out to Disney, okay? And I have friends there. So let's talk about cruise ships for a second, because Disney has cruise ships. Say, who wants to get on a cruise ship? I'm going to put my hand up because I might be the only guy.
You might be the only guy, because too many people I hear say it's a petri dish.
Well, I'm not saying today. I'm saying, but I'm going to tell you why I want to get back on a cruise ship. Well, I went on the website for Carnival Cruise Lines the other day just to see what it would cost for a 3-day cruise from Fort Lauderdale to the Bahamas once they reopen again. Michelle, do you want to guess what that cruise costs?
$249.
$129 per person.
Wow.
And so the only thing that's more awesome than a cruise is a cheap cruise. So if you can price your services down to zero, you're going to get market share back. And there's plenty of pent up demand. So yes, cruise ships got their problems today. They'll get past them, but people will come back. People want to spend. There's pent up demand for Disney, for its parks, and for its cruise ships.
But you mentioned earlier a little bit about hospitality, and I agree there's pent-up demand. I just think it's going to take a lot longer for that pent-up demand to get back to pre-pandemic heights. What do
Well, I
you
agree with that.
say?
I mean, certainly from a business and international travel standpoint, no doubt about it. Because I'm not the guy who necessarily decides whether I want to go on a business or an international trip. I am the guy who decides I want to go on a domestic vacation. And I went plenty of them this summer, driving up and down the East Coast to some really cool places. So, but the problem is we're a very small piece of the hotel travel puzzle.
So Spencer, let me just ask you, normally do you do driving vacations in the summertime, or would you typically be flying somewhere?
You know, it's funny. When I did my first drive to North Carolina, my life, which I did in June, I was like, man, this is a long drive, 6.5 hours. Ugh, you know what? I did it 4 more times, and it wasn't bad. So I'm going to be doing more driving vacations. Actually, if there's a silver lining to the apocalypse, the silver lining is that it opened up America to me, and I'm going to go to more places now. And I had a great time, notwithstanding the tragedy that's in front of us.
Understood. So a few more questions here. Do you think the market is going to turn away from high-rise office space?
Nope. Next question. No, but the answer to that is the 9/11 example. And again, I hate bringing it up, but you got to bring it up because post 9/11, nobody wanted to be in high floors. Nobody wanted to be in dense cities. Everybody came back. Why? There's value to density. And the value to density is in the virtuous cycles that are created. And the virtuous cycles are not just within your company, but it's also with the retail that's nearby. It's the other service providers that are in or near the building. So vertical density is the answer. And it's not just the answer to the office sector, it's the answer to the apartment sector. So I talked about affordable housing today earlier, and now I'm going to pound the table. The solution, I have an expression, the sky is the solution to affordable housing. It is not single family, even though my father-in-law is in the single family development business. It is vertical density because it creates virtuous cycles. And I think that it creates opportunities to put some of these things in transit-oriented locations in suburbs. So don't shy away from the sky. And I'll say one more thing. For those of you who have green thumbs, the sustainability crowd, and I'm one of them, by the way, you should be pushing for vertical density, much greener than is horizontal density.
Good point. Hey, let's talk about landlords for a minute. So many landlords have taken leadership roles and been extremely responsive and early adopters during COVID. How do you think landlords will take this opportunity to differentiate themselves post-COVID?
Well, I would suggest to you it's very simple. The best landlords will win. Best landlords always win. And the best landlords are landlords that not only have the best physical space, but also landlords that have the best space as it relates to the relationship with the tenant. I think that the traditional relationship between the office tenant and the office landlord is going to stay largely the same with the exception of flex space. I think there is going to be a change in the relationship. There will be more flexibility there. Where you're going to see the most flexibility is within retail. And you're going to see a relationship change there. And I wrote a piece probably about a year ago, which I called The New Rent. And The New Rent's also in CBRE's terrific piece called The Way Forward, which is the title of today's piece. And what it talks about is the new relationship between landlords and tenants. And it can't just be, you got a 10-year lease, you got fixed rents, you got to pay me. Now it could include more percentage rent. But here's where it gets interesting. I think it should also include a piece of the internet sales in the trade zone near your building. And, people say, well, that's crazy talk. No, it's not. If you are a franchisee of Party City, you get a piece of the internet sales in the region. You think this is crazy? Simon and Brookfield just bought JCPenney last week. A couple weeks ago, they bought Brooks Brothers. They're going to get pieces of the internet sales. So that's crazy talk. I think the landlords that win not only have collaborative environments, but also have the best legal relationship with their tenants.
So, just as a follow-up to that, okay, When you look at companies, what percentage of companies do you think are going to have their employees decide to go fully work from home? And after a couple years, how many of those do you think will realize that maybe they needed an office?
Well, I like to harken back to 5 or 6 years ago. And I won't name the company, but it was a very big tech company which had about 20,000 remote workers. And they said to their 20,000 remote workers, it was only 5 years ago, they said, you better find a permanent place in the office or you might need a new job. So it's funny how the pendulum has swung completely the other way right now on this same question about how you can work from home longer and all those things. But I go right back to what I said before. I don't think you're going to see any big companies that are going to go completely work from home. I don't think any company is going to go completely work from home. I think you'll have some that will have more, some will have less, some will have more flexibility, more fluidity, but you harken right back to the same word, productivity. There's no substitute for the productivity within the office. It's why the best companies will always have a significant portion of their real estate footprint in traditional office environments.
Yeah, it's back to the meaning of place and what can happen when you have a group of people who can collaborate in real time. Let's face it, technology is great, and there's been some amazing tools, we've used during this pandemic, but it doesn't take the place of us being face to face and that idea generation that can happen or that transfer of corporate culture.
Without a doubt.
So, another question here is relative to European markets. And so we're hearing that construction costs are increasing in Europe due to difficulties in the supply chain. Do we think we'll see that here in the US?
Well, in the short term, we already are. There definitely have been not only disruptions to the supply chain, but early on in the pandemic, people were just shifting their supply chains for a lot of their finished goods coming from China to different places, and it increased the cost of things like marble countertops and knobs and other things in multifamily. So yeah, in the short term, you will see an increase in costs due to disruptions in the supply chain. But over the long term, I think it'll be solved. And quite candidly, again, we're all searching for silver linings in this terrible pandemic. I think that the short answer that I hear quite a lot now is the +1 strategy. What is the +1 strategy? Most supplies for most goods and most goods come from China. Now people are talking about Vietnam. Now people are talking more about Mexico. Now people are talking about reshoring more here to the United States. Short term, without a doubt, supply chains are and will continue to be disrupted. But over the long term, I think the supply chains will be more resilient. And I think you'll see more of them here in North America, which includes Canada and Mexico as well.
Thanks, Spencer. One final question. For companies that are all going all unassigned, what will they lack and miss?
First of all, I see very few companies doing that. But nevertheless, for those companies that are on one end of the scale of work from home versus the other, that's the way I would frame it. I think what they will miss is that productivity. It's the higher value add work that will be lost. Now, there are some companies, and I don't want to diminish what anybody does for a living. Everybody's work has value, but some are already higher value add levels, require more collaboration than others. I think that work, to the extent it's valuable to the company, will be lost. Their ability to innovate will be lost. And certainly their ability to attract and retain talent will be lost. Let me just cut right to the chase here. If you're a younger professional straight out of college or grad school, do you want to work from home, or do you want to work in an office with people that are like yourself, some older folks who've learned more? I think the answer is black and white.
So I see our younger people clamoring to get back to the office. They want the ability to eat lunch with their friends, to work with their friends, to take advantage of, as you say, that learning from other employees, especially more experienced ones within the company. So indeed, I think there is that pent-up demand. So Spencer, thank you so much. I'd like to turn things back over to Karen at this point.
Hello. Thank you so much, Michelle and Spencer. What a terrific conversation that you let us listen in on. and asked some questions. It was a perspective of post-COVID world that I think we all really appreciated and needed to hear, particularly as we look to the future. So thank you so much. It's just amazing.
Yeah, what to me is even more amazing is how incredibly knowledgeable, articulate, and informed Spencer is about all his opinions. So I can't thank him enough about sharing all that with us today.
Well, let me give one more shout
Not
out
shy.
to Michelle and Karen and to Fran for getting me today's gig. Not only am I a big fan of Cornet, I'm a fan of this chapter. I live here. So I offer it up to anyone. Please reach out anytime if you have any more follow-up questions, comments, concern. I'm a big Cornet fan, a big fan of all the clients on the call.
Wonderful. And our young leaders, our special events committee is hosting a happy hour this afternoon at 4:30 to continue this conversation and follow up. So if there are any questions that come out of that, we will make sure that we send them to you, Spencer or Michelle, and have you again weigh in on that. So thank everyone who attended today, and especially for hanging tight when we had a little technology glitch. Don't forget the chapter awards, October 15th. Be there. Don't miss out. Okay. Thank you all.
Karen, thanks for your facilitation.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye all.